Ideas that are shaping our world and changing our lives. Along with my colleagues from NPR, we'll go behind the news to look at what's happening and why. Watch now, Fridays at 9, here on OPB.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. The Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon.
Wells Fargo, proud to support our communities with quality family programming.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, a summary of today's news, a report and some analysis of the Pope's message and meeting about sexual abuse by priests, a report on the terrible drought in the Northeast, and the Middle East conflict as seen through the separate Christian eyes of a Lebanese bishop and a Southern Baptist leader.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
Imagine a world where we're not diminishing resources, we're growing them. Ethanol, a cleaner burning fuel, made from corn. ADM, the nature of what's to come.
And by SBC Communications. From high-speed internet access and voice services to data transport, networking, and e-business solutions, when it comes to providing what it takes to help the world communicate, we're on it. SBC Communications.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Pope John Paul II today called sexual abuse by priests both a sin and a crime. He spoke to American cardinals and bishops opening a two-day meeting at the Vatican. He said, people need to know there is nowhere in the priesthood for those who would harm the young. Several clerics said there was no discussion of Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston. He's been under pressure to resign for mishandling sex abuse cases. We'll have more on the conference in a few minutes. Israeli and Palestinian negotiators met today to try to end a standoff in Bethlehem. Elsewhere, Israeli forces killed a Palestinian militia leader and his bodyguard. We have a report from John Irvine of Independent Television News.
This is the aftermath of the assassination of two Palestinian militants. Acting on precise information, the Israelis hit their car with missiles. In response, associates of the dead men killed three alleged informers. Palestinian society is becoming increasingly lawless in the absence of an effective administration. Getting off the streets of Bethlehem, these were people returning home as an Israeli curfew was reimposed. The army retains a sizable presence throughout the town because of the ongoing siege at the Church of the Nativity. These soldiers feared sniper fire from Palestinian militants inside the basilica. Three Armenian priests managed to leave the church today. The Israeli army had seen their appeal for help. They described shocking scenes and said Palestinian gunmen had resorted to stealing from them. After negotiations that finally got underway this afternoon, this was a messenger going into the church to report back. The people of Bethlehem, living under virtual house arrest for 3 weeks now, will be hoping the siege soon comes to a peaceful end.
Late today, Israeli soldiers killed three Palestinian gunmen who tried to infiltrate a Jewish settlement in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Sharon said today the military campaign in the West Bank paved the way for peace. He spoke via satellite to an American-Israeli group in Washington, and he offered a three-part plan for a proposed regional peace conference.
One, a complete cessation of violence, hostilities, and especially incitement. Two, a long-term intermediate agreement similar to an armistice. And finally, three, a permanent agreement in which Israel's final borders and the Palestinians' final borders will be established.
In response, President Bush said today a peace conference was one of many options under consideration. In Pakistan today, 2 police officers testified they heard the chief suspect admit his role in the killing of Daniel Pearl. The Wall Street Journal reporter was abducted in January and later murdered. Defense lawyers for Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh said the confession was not made under oath and should be thrown out. He and 3 co-defendants could get the death penalty. Federal authorities announced today they've arrested nearly 100 airport employees in the Washington area. They're charged with obtaining security badges by fraud at Dulles International and Reagan National airports. Attorney General Ashcroft said it was part of an ongoing national investigation in the wake of September 11.
Today's arrests and indictments are an acknowledgement that the responsibility for airport security does not fall on air passengers alone. The American people are being asked to put up with long lines and intrusive searches. Americans deserve the confidence of knowing that the individuals working in our airports are worthy of our trust.
The federal prosecutor leading the investigation said there was no evidence any of those arrested were linked to terrorism. White House counselor Karen Hughes announced her resignation today. She's one of President Bush's closest advisors, dating back to his days as governor of Texas. She said today her family wanted to return to Texas. Hughes will leave the White House this summer, but the president said she'll remain part of his inner circle. A freight train collided head-on with a commuter train near Los Angeles this morning. 2 people were killed, more than 260 injured. Firefighters used ladders to help passengers out of 2 derailed commuter cars. There was no word on how the trains ended up on the same track. Just last week, the Amtrak auto train derailed in northern Florida, killing 4 people. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the Pope and the Cardinals in Rome, the drought in the Northeast, and 2 Christian views of the Middle East crisis. The Catholic Church in turmoil. Kwame Holman narrates our opening report.
This morning, Pope John Paul II began the unusual 2-day session with the American Cardinals by using his strongest words yet to describe the incidents of sexual abuse involving American clergy. The abuse which has caused this crisis, he said, is by every standard wrong and rightly considered a crime by society. Addressing the victims of what he called an appalling sin in the eyes of God, the Pope said, "I express my profound sense of solidarity and concern." Outside the private meeting, some demonstrators said the crisis must be an impetus for church reform.
90% of sexual violences against children happen in the family, in the Catholic family.
The incidents and allegations of improper conduct involving priests have received growing publicity since January. Cases now are reported in some 17 cities, from Cleveland to Los Angeles to Palm Beach, Florida. Across the country, an estimated 3,000 American priests face allegations of child sexual abuse. Boston's Cardinal Bernard Law is at the center of one controversy. He's accused of failing to discipline priests in the Boston Archdiocese, including Father John Gagan, who in March was sentenced to 10 years in prison for sexually abusing a 10-year-old boy. Last week, Cardinal Law acknowledged he made a visit to the Vatican. Afterward, he said he would not step down. However, on Sunday, he offered words of contrition.
Regrettably, I and many others have been late to recognize the inadequacy of past policies, the dimensions of the crisis, and the changes required to restore a sense of trust. I wish that I could turn the clock back.
New York Cardinal Edward Egan also expressed remorse in the face of charges he failed to discipline priests despite charges of pedophilia. Egan said Sunday for the first time that mistakes may have been made. On the agenda for the Vatican meetings today and tomorrow is whether the Church should establish standards for dealing with problem priests.
After today's morning session, Cardinal Roger Mahoney of Los Angeles told ABC the Pope had endorsed a zero-tolerance policy on pedophilia.
Well, we got that commitment from the Holy Father, who practically said it more clearly than anyone has said it. And in addition, he has assured us through the officials of the Holy See that the administrative canonical processes we need to make sure that priests who are abusers are put out of the priesthood.
But Cardinal Francis George of Chicago said there was no consensus on zero tolerance. The problem, he says, is that the sins in question are not all the same.
There is a difference between a moral monster like Gagin, who preys upon little children and does so in a serial fashion, and to someone who, perhaps under the influence of alcohol, engages in an action with a 17 or 16-year-old young woman who returns his affection. In terms of the culpability and in terms of the possibility for a reform of one's life, they're two very different sets of circumstances.
The scandal may yield discussion of other issues, including homosexuality in the ministry. And at least one U.S. cardinal says he'll raise the church's celibacy requirement before the meetings end tomorrow.
Margaret Warner has more.
For more on today's meetings in Rome, we turn to John Allen, Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter and Independent News Weekly. Welcome, John. Set the scene for us for this highly unusual meeting. How did it unfold?
Well, there were actually 3 sessions today, all of which took place in the Apostolic Palace, which is the building just over my left shoulder, though it may be a little out of camera range. It's the building in which the Pope has his private apartments. It's also where he receives dignitaries. The first session was with the Pope and the Americans who are in town, the cardinals and the 2 officers from the U.S. Bishops' Conference. There, the cardinals and bishops got in a semicircle around the Pope, and he read an opening discourse to them. Then the Americans went to the Sala Bologna, which is a very ornate room used for audiences and meetings inside the Apostolic Palace, where they got around tables with the leaders, the heads of most of the departments of the Vatican, and rolled up their sleeves and got to work.
And we ran, the Vatican, of course, did release the full text of what the Pope had to say, and we've just run a short clip of one statement he made where he said, sexual abuse of the young is a crime as well as a sin. How did the cardinals you've spoken with interpret that?
Well, it was seen by several American cardinals as a very significant statement, as a step forward in the Church's understanding of sexual abuse of children by priests. Because so often in the past, this has been treated as a spiritual problem, as a sort of moral weakness or sin by priests, which can be addressed through spiritual remedies, that is, counseling and prayer and so forth, which would allow a priest to sort of pick up the pieces and resume his ministry. And I think what is happening at the moment is that there is a growing recognition that that sort of abuse also needs to be treated as a criminal issue, for which the proper forum is the criminal justice system. And so several American cardinals saw the Pope's use of that word as a recognition of that shift in thinking.
And then what guidance did they feel they were getting from him on the question of what bishops should do with priests, other than the law enforcement angle, but in terms of their role within the church and their ongoing role if they have been found guilty of abuse?
Well, the Pope's remarks on this point struck several of the cardinals as somewhat ambiguous. On the one hand, he did, of course, refer to this as a crime. On the other hand, he also said that we must not lose sight of the idea of Christian conversion. That is, through repentance and conversion of heart, that priests can continue functioning in some way. And during a press briefing that took place after the morning session, Cardinal Francis George of Chicago, one of the participants in the discussions, told us that there is real division on this point, both inside the Vatican and also between the Vatican and the American bishops. There are some who would take a very hard line that any time a priest abuses someone, then you ought to have a one-strike-and-you're-out policy. That is, that ought to be it for him as a priest. There are others who would take a somewhat softer line, who would say that certainly the priest should not be in a position to abuse anyone again, but there might be other kinds of ministry that under certain circumstances would be appropriate. So I think that was a window into one of the points of debate going on inside the room today.
You speak of it as a window. How much do you all there covering it really know about what's going on in these closed-door meetings? And you mentioned this press conference. Is that unprecedented?
No. When there are gatherings at the Vatican, whether they're consistories of cardinals or synods of bishops, there are always press briefings. What was unusual, what was designed to be unusual this time, is that we were going to be getting press briefings twice a day. That is, they were telling us we'd be getting briefings at 1 o'clock and then again at 8 Rome time. However, the evening briefing today was canceled because the cardinals decided they needed time to work together on propositions they want to bring to tomorrow's session. And from what we understand, at least the afternoon briefing tomorrow is also going to be canceled because the Pope has invited the U.S. cardinals and bishops to lunch. So some of the transparency and some of the overt cooperation with the press that we were promised apparently is not going to materialize.
Well, from what you do know, let's look at a couple other issues and just tell me whether they were discussed today. How about the fate of cardinal law?
Everything we are told by cardinals who were in the room is that that issue did not come up, or that is, it came up only in one form, and that is Cardinal Law himself apparently apologized to his brother cardinals and brother bishops for his mishandling of the situation in Boston. He said to them, as was relayed to us by Cardinal George, that he was sorry for the mistakes he had made, and he recognized that if he hadn't made those mistakes, they might not find themselves here at all. Beyond that, however, we are told that no cardinal raised the issue of Cardinal Law's resignation, nor did anyone from the Vatican side raise it. And so as far as this meeting is concerned, it is, at least for now, a closed subject.
And what about some of these other issues, such as homosexuality in the church, the question of perhaps having married priests or women as priests? Any of those come up?
What we are told by the cardinals is that as of the end of the evening sessions today, those issues had not been raised in explicit form. Except that, of course, they were raised at the press briefing today by journalists asking for responses to these questions from Bishop Wilton Gregory, who is the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, and Cardinal George. And what we are also told is that most of the participants in these meetings believe that Pope John Paul II has already given his definitive answers to those questions. That is, there's not going to be a change in the teaching on celibacy. There's not going to be a change in the ordination of women. And therefore, while it might be useful to raise these issues as sort of trial balloons, the cardinals are telling us they are not expecting them to be dominant themes of conversation, nor do they expect dramatic policy departures at the end of this two-day summit.
All right, John Allen, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Gwen Eiffel takes the story from there.
For analysis of today's meeting at the Vatican, we turn to two Catholic theologians. George Weigel, author of Witness to Hope, the biography of Pope John Paul II. He is senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a Washington research organization. And Mary Hunt, who heads the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Rituals. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Read between the lines for us on Pope John Paul's statements today. He said, what did he say, and what didn't he say?
I think what he said, Gwen, was that this entire problem of sexual abuse, which includes pedophilia, the homosexual abuse of teenage boys and young men, and the age-old problem of priests misbehaving with women, has to be addressed comprehensively and at its roots. This is a problem that has emerged in a particularly acute form between the late 60s and the late 80s. At a time of dissent, undiscipline, breakdown of structures in the church, and I think the Pope wants that addressed comprehensively. Secondly, I think what he said immediately after that, after he had said that there is no place in the priesthood for those who abuse others, he said that the solution to this is going to be for the church to become more Catholic rather than less Catholic, for all of the people of the church, bishops, priests, and laity, to live the fullness of Catholic faith. This is a problem of failure of discipleship at the bottom, and I think the Pope is calling everyone to live a more integrally connected, thoroughly Catholic life.
Mary Hunt, what did he say and what didn't he say?
Well, I think what you have going on here, Gwen, is what I'd call an ecclesial enron. I think you have a very serious situation for which pedophilia is only the tip of the iceberg. I think that what the Pope did not address was criminal activity, not only in the pedophilia, which of course it is, but in the covering up and perhaps facilitating the possibility of that activity taking place across state lines, perhaps even in other countries. I think what hasn't been addressed as yet, and just the fact that it's all men and all cardinals meeting in Rome is evidence of this, is that the church really now is at a point of having to take seriously the kinds of reforms that were mentioned in the Second Vatican Council, and that many progressive Catholics, not only here but around the world, have been living out on our own. And so to look at structural reform to make the church a more democratic, participatory organization certainly hasn't been reflected even in the constitution of the meeting, much less in the discussion so far. But this isn't a two-day meeting problem. This is a long-term structural change necessary in a huge, powerful institution that now has really as much an economic problem on its hands as it does a sexual problem.
Since you both see this come at this from different points of view, let me just give you some of the lines from the Pope's statement today and ask your take on it. For instance, Sue, it seems that he addressed this to the cardinals and bishops, the leadership of the church. He said the way in which the church leaders are perceived to have acted in this manner, he talked about the perception. Do you think that that was the Pope signaling that this was only perception, or is that overinterpretation?
No, I think that's overinterpretation. Everyone is clear that there has been serious mishandling of this crisis of sexual abuse in all of its dimensions. Everyone is clear that there must be personnel policies put into place uniformly on a national level to prevent this kind of meltdown in the future. I think everyone is clear that seminary reform has to continue, that men have to be more adequately prepared to lead chaste, celibate lives. And I think everyone is clear that this very difficult but urgent issue of homosexuality in the clergy and the inability of apparently a significant number of homosexual clergy to lead chaste lives has to be seriously addressed.
Mary Hunt, the Pope, first you can respond to that.
Yes, I'm not going to touch the homosexuality question first. I'll go right to yours, because I think you're quite correct in looking at the word perception, that much of what has gone on has been not just perception but reality, and that the church has worked so hard for so long to keep secrets and has set up a system without checks and balances that perception has been all. And I think the smoke and mirrors are over and that people are now asking for accountability. I think the homosexuality question is quite extraneous in the sense that the issue at hand is criminal behavior, namely pedophilia. The sexual orientation of those who are engaged in that behavior is, in my view, not relevant.
To rank-and-file priests, the Pope said, there is no place in the priesthood and religious life for those who would harm the young. That's what's been interpreted widely as being a very strong statement. Is that the way you saw it?
I think that's right. I think it is a strong statement. I think we will see how strong it is if, in fact, it is backed up by the traditional Catholic approach to penance, namely saying that there has been sin involved, assuming that there is asking for forgiveness, and then some serious show of reparations for those survivor victims of these terrible crimes, and then real serious purpose of amendment not to do this again, and that would mean structural changes in the church. So we'll see how strong it is. I hope, especially for the victim survivors, that it is a very strong statement.
Did that suggest zero tolerance to you?
I think what it suggests, Gwen, is that there are certain acts that by their very nature disqualify a man from further functioning in the ministry. I think that's what the Holy Father is saying. That's a very old notion in the Catholic Church, goes back centuries. Some things are simply put you off the board, and the Church is going to have to come to grips with that. I don't think anyone is trying to do some sort of finesse on this here. I was in Rome for the past 3 weeks. During that period, I sensed very powerfully that what I called the urgency gap between the Church in the United States and the authorities of the Church in Rome had narrowed dramatically during that period. I think everyone is focused on this now in a serious way. And that's a good sign for the kind of reforms that are necessary in the future.
Being focused in a serious way, does that mean that the zero tolerance for a priest who commits the kind of act for which nothing should be forgiven applies as well to leaders who appear to cover that up?
I think we're talking about, certainly with pedophilia. A pedophiliac priest is a contradiction in terms. A man who has committed that sort of crime, that sort of gross, revolting sin has no place in the ministry. I think Cardinal George makes an interesting point. What happens if there's a one-time fall from grace 25 years ago and there's no pattern of abuse since then? That needs to be looked at very seriously. And bishops who have been irresponsible in handling this, bishops who have been irresponsible in handling this for whatever reason, if the bottom line is that abusers have been allowed to continue in the ministry, then I think some serious address has to be made to whether that man has lost his capacity to lead in the future.
I think this has to be seen in two ways, Glenn. One is that zero tolerance is really for the law to decide. This is a criminal activity, and it is really up to the law to decide that pedophilia is, in fact, in every instance, criminal behavior. So that's really not up to the Pope. The question at hand, I think, is a question of professional ethics. That is, are the sheep off limits to the shepherd? Can a doctor engage in this kind of activity with her patient? Can a lawyer do the same with her client? And the fact is that in many other disciplines, beginning with social work and among therapists and counselors, there are codes of professional ethics. I think this is what is lacking in not only the Roman Catholic situation, but in many other religious institutions that have had the same problem. Those institutions, with the help of places like the Center for the Prevention of Sexual and Domestic Violence in Seattle, have set in place policies. And they are enforceable policies that are understood by everyone within that tradition, and that's what we need.
If the cardinals and the bishops don't enforce these policies, if they come up with policies at their June meeting or at the end of this meeting, does that mean that heads should roll? Does that mean that these people should no longer be in these positions?
It seems to me that if there are clear personnel policies in place, and then there is another pattern of failing to enforce those, then yes, it seems to me that a man who fails to do that has failed fundamentally in his responsibility as a shepherd, as a pastor of the church, and as a leader of the Catholic people.
But I think the problem is much deeper than that, and I think it's much deeper than a two-day meeting or even the meeting in June. I think the problem is that in order to have the kind of church where there's accountability, checks and balances, participation and democracy, the Roman Catholic Church needs to make substantive structural changes. Happily, this meeting is not the only meeting going on. This weekend, the Catholic Organizations for Renewal will meet here in Washington. Next weekend, the Women's Church Convergence will meet in Florida. There are lots of groups of Catholics. So that to think that the...
Let me just ask you to follow up on what you just said. What do you mean when you say substantial structural change?
I mean that there would not be the kind of clerical system where one who was ordained was the only... that those who were ordained were the only ones who had decision-making power, who had jurisdiction, who could engage in sacramental ministry, but a much more participatory and democratic system like you have in the Lutheran, the Presbyterian, Episcopal churches. And these structures work very well in terms of their accountability. They are not without their problems of this sort, but they certainly are with structures of more accountability, so this sort of thing won't happen again.
Is that likely to be excuse me for interrupting, is that likely to be something that comes out of a meeting like this?
I don't think so, Gwen. As I said a moment ago, the resolution of this crisis is going to be for the Catholic Church to become more Catholic, not more Lutheran, not more Anglican, not more Presbyterian, not more secular. It's going to be for the people of the Church, bishops, priests, and people, to live the Church's sexual ethic, which is an affirmation of the gift of sexuality, more fully. We don't find a way out of this by imitating others. We find a way out of this by being true to the fullness of Catholic faith, which is what the Pope was calling everyone to today.
And finally, back to the Pope's words, he said he expressed his profound sense of solidarity and concern with the victims of abuse. Should there have been a more explicit papal apology?
This Pope has been talking about the reform of the priesthood for 23 years. The fact that we're just paying attention to that now is more of a function of our news cycle than of the reality of the situation. No one who knows this man cannot believe but that he is agonized by these problems, by the abuse of a vocation, which he himself holds up to a noble standard.
It's a start, but much, much more needs to be said and done, and we will watch this very carefully in hopes that victim survivors will, in fact, get their due, which is not only justice in their instances, but structural changes to prevent this from ever happening again.
Mary Hunt, George Weigel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gwen.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, no rain in the Northeast, and two different Christian views of the Middle East conflict. Tom Bearden has our drought story.
The East Coast is facing the worst drought in more than a century. Engineer Michael Barnes says the water level in New Jersey's Wanakee Reservoir is less than half of normal. Where's the water normally?
Well, normally we're about 25 feet underwater, and then the water would be on top of those rocks, so they'd be totally submerged.
The water level in New Jersey's Wanakee Reservoir is so low that the utility company is taking the opportunity to try to dig it deeper, even though the company knows that's a largely futile gesture.
We would have to line trucks up from here down to Cape May, New Jersey, probably 180 miles, back to back, to get 1 day's extra supply. But we're whittling away at that.
Aquifers, underground reservoirs, are also so depleted that wells are drying up. Homeowners like Joanne Panneman are spending thousands of dollars drilling deeper in hopes of finding a new source. Images like these have become increasingly common across the eastern third of the country, where drought has not only dried up once reliable wells, but has parched the soil and has degraded the quality of surface water. Federal scientists say an extremely dry winter has brought severe or extreme drought to 21% of the U.S. New Jersey has been hit particularly hard. In March, the governor declared a drought emergency. Mandatory conservation measures have been imposed. Restaurants are prohibited from serving water unless customers ask for it. Homeowners can't use sprinkler systems unless they've just installed new landscaping. Golf courses and landscaping companies have been forced to cut their water usage in half. Bradley Campbell is commissioner of New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection.
For the short term, there is going to be an impact. There is going to be impacts on both households and businesses. But for the long term, if we're smart about improving water stewardship in the state, we're hoping we'll be able to avoid the kinds of restrictions we're having to have in this drought.
But local business people say the restrictions could cost them dearly. The Yasna Tournament Players Club in Princeton uses 30 million gallons of water a year to maintain the golf course. The majority of it comes from private wells. Another 4 to 5 million gallons comes from the city main.
You guys are checking the depths to make sure it's all the right depth?
Superintendent Roger Stewart is afraid that if the drought persists as predicted, the club could suffer devastating losses.
In some cases, we may be mistakenly thought of as purely recreation, when in reality the golf business is a business. People rely on it for income, and businesses that do business with golf courses rely on it for the business that it produces. So in reality, when you think about it, these irrigation issues and water issues can have a devastating effect on the business part of the game.
Landscapers, like Chris James, say their $8 billion industry is already feeling the pinch.
I do believe that if the drought continues at present levels, it will impact my business by nearly 30% or some $300,000 this year.
And James says homeowners in upscale neighborhoods like this one stand to lose large investments.
A property would have roughly $150,000 invested in their landscape. A prolonged drought of more than a year or two could cause true financial hardship.
There is some controversy over whether the restrictions are being applied fairly. Landscapers, among others, point to the fact that agricultural interests, which consume a great deal more water than they do, have not been required to reduce that consumption. Neither has industry. One complaint is that the New Jersey industry that uses the most water, the electric utilities, are exempt from drought restrictions. Power companies use about 48 million gallons of water a day to cool their generating plant equipment. But the utilities point to the 16 billion gallon Merrill Creek Reservoir in western New Jersey, which they say replaces all the water they take from the Delaware River. A consortium of companies built it after a severe drought in the mid-'80s. Dave Bird runs the facility.
We take water from the Delaware River during periods of high flow, and during periods of drought, we're able to release back into the river for the evaporative loss from the generating stations that we support.
Do you have enough water here to get you through what's projected to happen this summer?
We have more water here than reasonably could be expected to be used during the worst drought of record, so we are protected.
The utilities say if they were forced to reduce their use of cooling water, they'd have to generate less electricity, which could lead to brownouts. The argument goes beyond just restrictions. Water conservation advocates say development is at least partially responsible for the drought. They say parking lots and housing developments have paved over parts of the upstream watershed. That causes rapid runoff of rainfall into rivers and streams, preventing it from soaking into the ground and recharging the aquifers. Ella Filippone heads the Passaic River Coalition.
We need the streams and the headwaters
that feed these reservoirs to flow. And that all comes from groundwater that is stored in the ground and slowly releases. The most important thing is to find ways to deal with recharging the groundwater and creating greater supplies.
The Sierra Club's Jeff Tittle agrees. He blames government mismanagement.
There's no water planning. We're running water lines out into the critical areas next to our reservoirs to build more sprawl developments that end up robbing the reservoirs of water. It's just a total lack of planning. It's sort of first come, first serve, and it's very haphazard. In fact, New Jersey actually is a state that could run out of water. It's probably the only state east of the Rockies that actually has that severe of a water problem. And the reason is the mismanagement of water, but also the overdevelopment that's occurring here.
Water engineer Michael Barnes says running out of water is highly unlikely.
Well, I think if they follow the drought emergency, it will be rare that we should run out of water completely. Again, there's increasing levels of drought warning and watches and emergencies that add restrictions as the water supply will dwindle through the summer months.
But it's not impossible those taps could run dry.
I would say it's improbable if we do our jobs correctly in managing what's left of the supply.
Jeffrey Rothfeder, who wrote a book about water shortages, says what's happening in New Jersey merely reflects a much larger global water crisis.
It highlights a bigger problem, that we're running out of water in a lot of places in the country, in a lot of places around the world. When the drought ends, there will be less water than before, and less than 10 years ago and less than 20 years ago. The drought here, most people view it as, it's in my backyard, can't wait till it goes away, then I don't have to worry about water anymore. But as the crisis is looming, we're going to all have to worry about it as a global issue.
Rothfeder says innovative solutions are needed, like importing or desalinating water, or pricing it to reflect what it actually costs to deliver, so consumers will appreciate its true value. New Jersey's Commissioner of Environmental Protection, Bradley Campbell, says better stewardship must begin at the local level.
We have heard very, very clearly from communities that they expect government to step up and manage resources to strengthen water stewardship in the state. Because I think the public understands in this drought, and certainly in the face of emergency restrictions, they understand that the only way communities can grow is if we protect their water supplies.
The challenge for all levels of government will be to come to an agreement on what to do, and then follow through with that solution even after the drought is over, something they've been unable to do in the past.
Finally tonight, two very different Christian perspectives on the Middle East, and Ray Suarez.
We get the first view from the Right Reverend Ria Abu El-Assal. He's the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem. I spoke with him last week at Washington's National Cathedral.
Bishop, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much indeed.
Let's talk a little bit about the Christian population in that area. This is so often depicted as an argument between the Jewish state and an aspiring Muslim people who want a self-governing country, and Arab Christians seem to be either forgotten or in the middle. Where are they?
We are forgotten by the majority of the Christians. Very few people in the West recognize the fact that there are as many as 16 million Christians of Arab background. The Arab Palestinian Christians are part and parcel of the Arab Palestinian people. We are part and parcel of the Arab nation. We have no other history except the history of the Arabs. We have the same culture, the same habits, and certainly we have the same aspirations, the same hopes.
These people, the Arab Christians, live in both Israel and in what may become a Palestinian state.
Yes.
Do they have a role to play because of their familiarity, their attachment to both places?
Indeed. I'm an Arab Palestinian. I'm a Christian, an Episcopalian, an Anglican, as we are also known. But also I carry an Israeli citizenship. We can be the bridge. We offer our services to the parties in conflict.
What is your feeling? How this story begins to come to some sort of ending? We see cycles, spasms almost of attack, counterattack, 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 and no one seems to be able to stop.
Yeah, well, tit for tat and an eye for an eye will bring us nowhere. All of us will become blind. This is one. Second, this vicious circle of violence will not bring peace closer to the area. The root cause of all of this is the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. As long as there is an occupation, I fear there is very little hope for peace. The two communities have been predestined to live side by side. In the words of Desmond Tutu, he described this coexistence as scrambled eggs that no one can unscramble. Neither party intends to annihilate the other. I mean, the ongoing conflict damages not only the image of the soldiers, but also those who run the countries. It's a disaster for Palestine. It will be a disaster for Israel. And I'm afraid it will be a disaster for people who continue to stand afar watching what is happening.
The Israelis point, and have pointed for the last several weeks, to those who would use themselves as weapons to kill others, civilians, non-strategic targets, and say, as American office holders have said, that these people do not bring peace one moment closer to Palestine. Would you join them in that?
Yes, neither party will bring peace through war. Wars never bring peace. Those who go on suicide missions are the desperate, the empty lives of the Palestinian people. Those who have been humiliated over the years. Mind you, most of them are 18, 19, 20. They were kids in the first Intifada. Again, one of the heads of churches described those as fruits on a tree that we call the Israeli occupation. We want to see an end to those fruits. We need to cut the tree.
But how do you reassure Israelis about their own future and their own security when they know how many of them have died to assure the security of their state?
Both parties have been killed, this way or that way. Those who have been buried under the rubble, many of them were innocent. Many of them were innocent. They need to be recognized as human beings. It's painful. It gives me a feeling sometimes of frustration, I mean. Why, when something happens to the Jewish family, President Bush would offer condolences? 200, they say 500 people were killed in Jenin. Many of them were of the aged, still staying in their homes, buried under the rubble. Why aren't we recognized as equal human beings? The Palestinians and the Israelis have lived side by side for thousands of years. All we need is to go back and read the Bible. There were tribal conflicts, yes, but there were long eras of peace and harmony between the two communities. The Palestinians are prepared to sign a peace treaty on the basis of United Nations resolutions, and we expect the international community, led by the only superpower today, the American administration, by President Bush, to see to it that this wonderful dream come true. We need also to tell the world what is the position of the two parties, not only the position of one party. The problem, the Palestinians have always been blamed. Their acts have always been described as acts of terrorism. The others have been described as acts of heroism. I think we need to, as I said, recognize the pain, the suffering. President Arafat is still under siege. He can hardly act. How can we expect him to lead his people, to stop those individuals who are very desperate, who've been humiliated, as I said? Not that we want to see more people killed and be killed. No, we want them to live and enjoy life.
But you think that it's impossible to stop them given the situation now?
It will stop if people come to terms with the needs, the aspirations of the others. As long as people continue to occupy your land, you will continue to see people resisting occupation.
Well, Jerusalem is your seat. Do you have much of a voice there in a world where religious parties, Orthodox religious parties, are rejoining Sharon's coalition, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade is on the other side trying to think about ways to cause more death? Does anybody listen to the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem?
They listen to the Anglican Bishop, they listen to the heads of churches. What concerns me now is how we, as Christians in the first place, but also as people of faith, be we Jews or Muslims, what is our role? Do we continue to wash our hands like Pilate? Do we stand afar like those who watched the crucifixion of this party or that party? Or we become involved? The early church had far less numbers than what we have today, but they managed to change the course of human history. It's time for the church to see to it that they change the course of history in the Middle East by becoming positively and directly involved, rather than thinking that with remote controls they can resolve that conflict. That's why I wish to see Colin Powell, who is also a brother in Christ, go back, give it another try, and see to it that the two parties meet face to face, bring an end to that pain and suffering.
Bishop Ria, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate this time with you, with our people in this wonderful country.
And a postscript. Since I spoke with the bishop last week, the number of dead at the Jenin refugee camp has become a matter of considerable dispute. Now for another view, I'm joined by Dr. Albert Mohler. He's president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, the flagship seminary of the Southern Baptist Convention. The convention is the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S. with 16 million members. Well, Reverend Mohler, you heard the bishop call the Israeli occupation the root cause of the problems we see today in the Middle East. What's your response?
Well, I think there is obviously a cause behind what the bishop calls the root cause. The Israeli occupation did not take place in a historical vacuum. As a matter of fact, you have to go back to the opposition from the Palestinians to the very existence of the State of Israel. You have to go back to the 67 war and understand that it was a matter of self-protection and a matter of national security for Israel to occupy those territories. I do not believe that Israel wishes to continue that occupation. As a matter of fact, I think you would find the Prime Minister and Israel as a state and the Israelis as a people seeking to find some way to disengage from the West Bank and from those territories, but not compromising their own national security.
Are both sides culpable in the current cycle of violence?
Well, anytime you find a conflict like this, you can be assured that sin is to be found on both sides and fault is to be found on both sides. But the bigger issue here is the basic right of Israel to exist and the right of any nation to protect itself. The very real threat of terrorism is a new thing for the United States, but it's been perpetual for the State of Israel since 1948. And I think we have to be very clear that even as the Palestinians are presented often in the media as a beleaguered minority, when you put Israel in the context there in the Middle East, you see what a vulnerable position that nation is in.
What about the bishop's view of the possibility of side-by-side states and an end to this story that would see two states living in peace?
I think most American Christians are reconciled to the idea of two states side by side. The State of Israel and successive governments has indicated its willingness to accept a Palestinian state so long as that state acts in a mature and responsible way that befits a modern nation, a modern state. And to this point, we find the problem, and that is under Chairman Arafat, the Palestinians have been unwilling to control terrorism and to take on the mature responsibilities of statehood. There are difficult issues to try to sort out here. They really are like scrambled eggs that are difficult to unscramble. But I think the first place to start is with Israel's right to exist and with the Palestinians' right to justice, but that justice must be reconciled with the kind of terrorism and the extremism that we see demonstrated by many of their people and at least acknowledged and allowed by their leadership.
So you didn't buy his reference to the acts of terrorism as the work of desperate and humiliated young people?
Well, certainly they are desperate. I can't imagine any other explanation. But the source of that desperation is a critical question. You know, the blame for the indignities of the Palestinians is most often alleged and attributed to the Israeli government. But the fact is that the Palestinians have suffered from the hands of Arab governments there in the region and in a historical pattern of indignity. I sympathize with that indignity. I want to speak on behalf of the Christians in the Middle East and in the Holy Land, the majority of whom are Palestinians. But we have to see the achievement of a genuine peace, and this means a peace that acknowledges on the Palestinian part the right of Israel to exist.
Let's talk a little bit about the very public posture for conservative Christians on this issue. For a long time, the movement, such as it is, has been associated with domestic causes, cultural struggles inside the United States. Why are they so front and center now on this particular bit of foreign policy?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, a conservative Christian consensus in support of Israel predates, in many ways, the entry of evangelicals in an organized way into our own national politics. There are many reasons for this, but central to that is the biblical understanding that God has established a covenant with the Jewish people, that they are a chosen nation, and that Christians, understanding that we have been grafted on to the tree of Israel, as the Apostle Paul said, nonetheless must acknowledge with great respect the Jewish people. And most American conservative Christians, most evangelicals, would see the establishment of the Jewish state in Israel as a matter very much related to biblical prophecy and as a responsibility for American Christians to speak as advocates and defenders of that state.
Well, there have been now a willingness to back that sentiment with muscle, with dollars, with organizing power. You look at the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, Christians for Israel, two American organizations. Are you injecting the American Christian voice into this debate in a way that's heard sort of separately from others that are being expressed?
Well, if you look at the population of the United States, there are about 6 million Jewish persons and at least something like 50 million conservative Christian evangelicals. The critical support for Israel in this country in many ways falls, in terms of numbers, upon those Christians who are willing to speak. We are acting as Americans, and we believe our government and this administration should support the Jewish people and at the same time support the state of Israel, hold Israel accountable for its actions, but protect its right to exist and its right to defend itself. At the same time, we're functioning as Christians, not just as Americans, who believe that Christians have a unique biblical responsibility to recognize the Jewish people and the state of Israel as an important part of God's sovereignty, as a representation of God's plan to bless the nations, even through the state of Israel. Evangelicals may disagree about exactly how Israel plays out in biblical prophecy or how this particular government may be represented in terms of the prophetic material in the Scripture, but this much is sure. We believe that Christians have a responsibility to protect the Jews and to speak on behalf of the Jewish people.
Well, are there biblical citations being made in some of the voices being raised in support of Israel? Is this something that you go back to Scripture on?
Absolutely. We are a scriptural people. And there are Old Testament roots where God made promises to the Jewish people about the land of Israel. Now, one does not have to believe that the current government of Israel represents the Israel of Scripture to understand that it is nonetheless a vehicle for what we believe will be the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, as we will see, as the New Testament tells us, a vast turning to Jesus Christ, to Christianity, to the gospel on the part of Jewish people. And then there are specific New Testament prophecies related to Jerusalem and to the coming reign of the Lord Jesus Christ. All of this comes together as evangelicals may have different understandings in the specifics. Nonetheless, there is a clear consensus of support for Israel and the understanding that God is not finished with the Jewish people.
And as a hard-nosed political matter, is the fact that this current administration is led by and largely staffed by people with a public faith commitment make your job of advocating for Israel easier?
Well, at least we believe that in this White House there is a determination to stand for freedom, I appreciate the very public Christian confession made by the President and so many in his administration. They have to fulfill their responsibilities as the leaders, and the President as indeed not only the leader of America but of the free world. But I believe it does give this President and his administration a deeper understanding and a deeper rationale for speaking on behalf of Israel, even as they seek for justice and peace, not only in the Middle East, but around the world.
The Reverend Dr. Albert Mohler, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you.
Again, the major developments of this day. Pope John Paul II condemned sexual abuse by priests at the start of a Vatican meeting with U.S. cardinals. And Israeli and Palestinian negotiators began talks on ending the standoff in Bethlehem. A correction before we go. Earlier, I mistakenly referred to Bishop Ria as Lebanese. Obviously, he's Palestinian. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
Imagine a world where we're not diminishing resources, we're growing them. Ethanol, a cleaner burning fuel, made from corn. ADM, the nature of what's to come.
And by SBC Communications. From high-speed internet access and voice services to data transport, networking, and e-business solutions. When it comes to providing what it takes to help the world communicate, we're on it. SBC Communications.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. The Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon.
Wells Fargo, proud to support our communities with quality family programming.
It's been called America's River, a ribbon of beauty coursing through our history.
George Washington called it the key to the continent.
Contributing to our economy, enhancing our culture. Today, it raises tough questions.
It's your river, it's my river. Who's got a right to mess it up?
With no easy answers.
The fight is far from over.
America's First River. Bill Moyers on the Hudson.
That's tonight at 9 here on OPB.
This week on Oregon Field Guide, a look at some of Oregon's more colorful visitors, the elusive seabirds that nest here. And for you hikers, a trek along the much-anticipated Oregon Coast Trail. We'll also show you one of our flesh-eating plants, the Darlingtonia, California. And finally, we head to Stout Mountain, a chunk of private property near Salem that remains virtually untouched. Oregon Field Guide, Thursday night at 8:30.